Welcome to What It Takes. Often when a community has a crisis, local governments step in and form commissions and committees to try to address it. The cynical among us might not expect much to actually come from such efforts. My guests today are working to change that. They are Decca Knight, Gun Violence Prevention Commission Secretary and Reset Volunteer, and Antonio Stovall, Youth and Gang Violence Prevention Outreach Worker. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So this is actually the second program we're doing on this topic. I think it's important enough that it warrants two. But Decca, let's just start with you. How did you get involved in violence prevention?
So my background is as an educator in the school system as a school counselor, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor. And in addition, I own a couple of consulting firms where I do parenting, education, and things like that. So just that community education and community mental health has always been something that's been really, really important to me. And I've been working in the community in different areas, connected with that over the past 15 years. And when I was working in Roanoke City Schools is when I first got involved in the commission, in the education committee, and working to kind of do what we call social emotional learning. And so that's one thing that we've been working really hard in the education committee, is to find some social emotional learning programs that are helpful for our kids in the community. And Antonio is going to become part of that now in his kind of new position as well. And so that's where it came from. And also having worked with a lot of kids who have been through really tough things personally as a counselor, and have witnessed a lot of things that are very traumatic. A big piece of my background is I'm a trauma specialist, and so I have a ton of training in that area and the impacts, cognitively speaking, emotionally speaking, developmentally speaking, and how that impacts children in their community. And so all those areas are really important to me, and I was really happy to be able to have a space in this conversation.
Sure. And Antonio, how about you? What brought you into this kind of work?
It's been a long road for me. I've got into meditation, yoga, martial arts, and eventually I had an opportunity to work with TAP, and I was starting to do a lot of work with the Yale program and a couple other programs that they're doing, dealing with the youth. And eventually a spot opened up at William Fleming to teach African American culture, doing contract work through TAP. So I had the opportunity to work with a group of young men, and my program started to grow so much that it started to get recognition from the city. And so this position opened up, and I applied for it. And ever since then, it's just been a great experience for me. I'm really big about the community and being a model for change in the Roanoke community.
Well, and the reasons for this task force, the Violence Prevention Task Force, are not happy reasons. Let's talk a little bit about just sort of the reason that this task force was founded. Decca?
And so when we begin to see kind of increases in violence in the community, we want to be able to fix it really quickly. And I think that that's normally kind of a community response. We need to go in and we need to fix it quickly. And what we know is that there are systemic issues that we need to work on as a community in multiple areas, whether that's community building, education, job development, things like that, in order to help stem the tide of violence going forward. And that's kind of where the commission comes in, is we needed to come up with a framework that we could have we have various different committees that are working in various different areas of the city and working collaboratively with city government in order to really help in some of these areas that we have targeted and that we've assessed are our top areas of need. And so it's a response to some of the gun violence, and it's a response to things that are happening in the community, but I think it's also important for individuals to understand that it is kind of a top-down and bottom-up approach at the same time, and that we're really working on some of these more systemic factors going forward.
So, and Antonio, just so you know, I taught at Fleming myself. Go Colonels. It's been a long time now. In working with students there at Fleming, were there things, and I don't know your background at all in terms of how you grew up or anything, but were there things that surprised you in terms of attitudes about things like responses to challenges or threats or, just getting along?
My background, I grew up in Southwest, the Hurt Park area. And so I grew up around a lot of poverty, and a lot of the students I work with come from that same environment. So living in that environment, you start to become a product of that environment. So when it comes to like learning how, being able to have, when it comes to conflict resolution, it's that area, that skill is not really in that community. And when in the classroom, those are some of the things I try to work on. Them having more emotional stability, them teaching them the importance of having discipline, and just being like a better person all around. That's some of the things that I try to work on with dealing with the youth.
And so from growing up in Hurt Park, an area I'm familiar with and love,
Yeah.
How did you then transition to, you described, yoga and martial arts and all of that. How did that happen for you?
Just from the trauma that I experienced growing up as a child, just being in that environment and just dealing with like depression and stress, and I just was looking for an outlet. And so I got into mindfulness. Eventually I got into martial arts, and I just continued to grow as a person, bettering myself. And the more I did that, the more doors started to open up for me. And just getting different opportunities to work with different people, working with the youth, working with adults, and using that opportunity, doing that opportunity, I just started to see that I was starting to help a lot of people. And this is when I had the opportunity to work with the city, to continue to do the work that I'm already doing in the city.
Sure, I see you smiling over there, Decca. That must do, as a counselor,
Yeah.
that must do your heart good.
Yeah.
So how do we work to, and I'm sure this is the big question, right? How do we work to get more kids? You're the exception rather than the rule, I would think, in terms of your approach to the trauma that you faced. What is the path to getting more kids to see the benefits of that, the opportunities that open up?
So one of the things that we're trying to work on in the commission, we've already had a few community forums where we've talked about what we call trauma-informed care or trauma basics, is educating community members about what happens to your brain and body when you witness violence in your neighborhood or violence in your home, and how that can begin to actually kind of change the structure of your brain over time. Wow. It can begin to change your stress hormones, your cortisol, all those things that Antonio is talking about, like mindfulness work. All of those things can help calm down all of those neurological changes, those biological changes that you have in your body. But a lot of people don't even know that that's happening, right? When you're in a situation over and over and over again, and you're seeing a lot of violence and you're becoming overwhelmed by the trauma, your body begins to change, your brain begins to change, but a lot of people don't even know that that change is happening because they're in the middle of it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is helping people understand that when you go through trauma, what happens to you, and what happens to your brain, what happens to your emotions in your body, what happens to your ability to regulate your emotions, and that it's okay to try some different things to help regulate your emotions and help regulate yourself. Whether it's getting counseling, doing mindfulness, doing more exercise, things like that. If we don't know that it's something that's building up inside of us, we can't address it. And so one of the first things that we do is address it in that way and have that education and say, you've been through trauma. A lot of people go through trauma. In fact, adverse childhood experiences. It's a study that's been around since the 1990s, and there are 10 adverse childhood experiences, and most people experience some type of trauma in their childhood. And the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the more likely you're going to have long-term effects. They're going to influence not only you emotionally, but physically as well. So helping people to understand that and saying you can mitigate that. There are things you can do to be resilient. There are things you can do to get help and to help yourself and your families and your community. But just pretending it's like it's not there, that's not going to help anybody. And that's kind of what Antonio was talking about. You kind of discovered that on your own. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have a mentor or someone in your own experience?
Oh yeah, I've learned from a lot of great teachers from across the country. When it comes to yoga, when it comes to martial arts, I've learned a lot of great things from a lot of different people, and everything that I've learned, I've just now started just to teach the youth about when it comes to history, when it talks about the importance of nutrition, the importance of culture. All these things are some of the things that I share with the youth, because these are things that I didn't know about as a child and as a teenager. And when I started to study history, study more about culture, just study more about the importance of nutrition, studying more about the importance of understanding my mind and how my body works, it just gave me more confidence in myself. And I just started to share with other people. And I think now a lot of the youth are looking for that type of awareness. They're looking for that type of information because they're seeking something. That's why a lot of times they're joining these gangs, because they're seeking identity. And
Yeah, let's talk about that. Like,
Okay.
what needs, people on the outside are like, well, why would you do that? Why would you go through an initiation of a gang or do things that you maybe know aren't the right thing to do? What's in it for a young man, and I don't know about young women, but like, what is in it for them to be a part of a gang?
a lot of times it's just to feel accepted for protection. I mean, sometimes it's just all you know because that's all you've been around, and they can't comprehend any other thing than that gang. So that they go out and seek that, and they become that because it's just a part of the environment. So when it comes to identity, it's important to share history and culture with the youth because that is what sparks their interest to want to do better and to help their community and help their family and just become an all around better person.
From a counseling perspective, when you come across someone who's engaging in really dangerous behavior to fit in, where do you start?
Great question. So I think the first thing is coming at them to build a connection and a relationship. I think a lot of these kids and young adults, a lot of people are telling them all the things they're doing wrong all the time. And to me, that's the wrong way to approach it. If they're getting that message from everybody else, you want to send a different message. And your message needs to be, I'm here to get to know you, to get to know where you come from, to get to know your personality, to get to know your family. And we're not even going to talk about that other stuff right now unless you want to. Because the most important thing to me is the person in front of me, not all that other stuff that you've been involved in. And we have heard at some of the TAP events as well, some of these youth say, just like Antonio said, like, I don't have a choice. If my cousin and my aunt and my mom and my dad are all kind of involved, in this lifestyle, they've told us as adults, you think we have a choice. You think we're making a conscious choice to be involved in this lifestyle, and we don't even have a choice. So when you come at us and say this is a choice that you've made, and it's the wrong choice, there's nothing we can do about it. So that shuts down the conversation right from the bat.
Right. Make a better choice, right? Not everybody has that option.
No.
Now I know in reading about the work of the task force and Reset, there have been some events, despite COVID. There have been some events. One I'd like you to describe for me, and I don't know if you were there, if you were both there. I heard that there was a situation where people from the community were screened behind a screen so that people couldn't see them, and then they talked about their experience. Can you share what that event was and what its purpose was and how it was received?
I think you were there, weren't you?
Were you there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was there too, but he was more involved because he was with TAP.
Sure.
So it was actually a group of my students from Fleming. We got them to come to the space and to voice their challenges and come up with some solutions. Because a lot of times when we're thinking about providing solutions for the youth, we forget about asking the youth. So that was the perfect opportunity for the youth to come and to address the challenges and some of the potential activities that we could bring in for the city coming from their lens versus us trying to project our lens on them. So we had they had a particular screen that the youth were behind, so to keep their identity concealed, and they just had the opportunity just to express what was on their heart and what's on their mind during that time.
Sounds very powerful.
It was, and for those of us that are leaders in the community and on the commission, the one thing that I remember so clearly from that event was that one of the youth said, you guys always say that we need mentors, and even that word for them is kind of triggering in a way. I don't know if you remember that, Antonio, and I was like, oh, and all of us were sitting out in the audience and we were like, oh, we've been calling everybody that's been working with the kids, we've been calling them all mentors. But he was saying, like, when I hear that word, I'm like, even if the intention, right, of that individual who's coming to help you, the words and the labels that are associated with some of these programs that we have can be off-putting, for some of these youth, and we wouldn't have known that if they didn't have that voice.
It was to ask them, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk specifically about how you and others are working. Let's say there's an act of gun violence, a shooting, whether someone's killed or just injured or whatever, there's kind of a rapid response that happens after that. And I'm not sure which one of you can address that best, but tell me what happens after an event. Let's say there's a shooting. What's the next step?
So we have the reset team, and there is a reset coordinator that works over at the police department. His name is Lloyd Merchant, and Lloyd Merchant is a paid employee of the city and kind of comes under the task force.
But not a policeman.
But not a policeman. He's not a sworn policeman, and that's a very important point. And then there are volunteers that work under his umbrella. So let's say that we have a shooting in the community within usually 24 to 48 hours if we can schedule it. The volunteers, he asks the volunteers who's available. We go out into that community. We cover a certain radius around where the incident happened. We knock on every door that we can and talk to residents. We supply them with resources. We supply them with just a listening ear. A lot of times they just want to express how difficult it was, what they saw, what they experienced. And then they can call Lloyd too. And so his number is in there, and if they need other resources that are not in the information we give them, then they can contact him, and he's kind of like a go-between between different agencies, making different connections within the community to get those individuals that are in the community help. And I have been on the reset team for months, and when I first went out, I was really concerned because I thought nobody's going to answer their door. If there's been, violence in a neighborhood, nobody's going to answer the door, and it's actually exactly the opposite. And we've had really, really great response from individuals, that are home when we go out, answering the door, talking to us. We've had individuals tell us, usually nobody cares after there is violence in our neighborhood. Nobody ever comes here after violence. It's just so nice to see somebody that's associated with the city that's actually here and that's actually listening to us. And so that community building is one, I think, of the most important long-term solutions, is, that systemic solution to let people know that we do care. If you were the neighbor, or you lived across the street and something happened, your voice and the trauma that you experienced or the trauma that you went through, especially if this person is important, and we see that, and we want to get you help if you want help.
And are you a part of that effort as well? Or
No, I'm not.
That's not something that you do. Okay, so, and in terms of, I can imagine that we're trying to diffuse the situation as well, because there's always an issue with wanting revenge or who did this.
Yep.
And so how do you then, how do you help to prevent that?
Yeah, and so that's a really complicated question. We also have, as part of the reset team, we have what's known as hotspots. And so we can identify areas of the city where there may be a kind of heightened increase coming up from, like, the criminologists from the police department saying there may be violence happening in this area soon. And so we go out proactively as well with the reset team. So for instance, today they deployed in a proactive manner to an area that they were a little bit concerned about. And so it's interesting because the same families keep seeing us, right? And they'll say, oh, you're here again. Thank you, you're here again, right? So we're not just leaving them, right? We're there in those communities. We are visible. People see us. And just having that presence over and over and over again in some of those communities that we're more concerned about, I think, is part of the solution. Only part of it, but part of it for sure.
And Antonio, I know, having taught myself in a couple different schools, that those like super intense moments where something does break out at school, it's often not the initial fight or tussle or even just hurling of insults that is the problem. It's what comes next. And I don't know if you've experienced that, but how do you try, even in the school environment, working with these kids to get them to think a little differently?
Unfortunately, I haven't had any situations like that. And one of the first things I do in my class, first things we do is we do mindfulness. We focus on the breathing, focus on relaxing, and then we go into the lesson for the day. We go into the affirmations. The affirmations help them affirm who they are and their goals, and then we go into the lesson. And since I've been there, this will be my third year, I haven't had any outbreaks. Pretty much all the students, they love the class. My class started off with like 20 students when my first year teaching. Now my class is all the way up to 70 students, and it continues to grow. I have a waiting list because the youth, when they come to my class, they feel empowered. They feel they feel like they're getting something from the class.
I'm just sitting here as a former school administrator thinking, how could I get 10 of you in every school, right? And I know that not everything happens. I want to be real clear that I understand that not everything happens in a certain part of town. That this is a problem that affects our whole community. And how do the folks, when you're out with the Reset team or doing an event, do people in the city understand that this is a whole city problem? This isn't just one zip code or one quadrant.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think they're beginning to. I think, initially when we started, there were certainly certain parts of the city that, didn't think that this was something that they really needed to be involved in. But I think as community members are beginning to understand that in order to help our community, we need to work together as a community, and we need to all come together to do that, to provide the safety for our families and the safety for our kids. And I think that no community can heal or make significant progress unless, everybody,
Right.
community leaders from all these different neighborhoods are at the table. Because if we're disjointed and we're saying, well, that happens over there, that is not going to make any positive progress for the initiatives that we have going forward.
Is there a role for the clergy? I'm sure, with the religious, for a lot of folks, that's the institution they
Yes.
still trust and they still attend.
Yes.
Do you find that among your students? That church is church an influence at all on these
I'm
folks?
not sure, because we really don't talk about
don't talk
religion
about
in
that?
class. They feel that they need some alternative form of education that's going to give them certain things that they're not learning in school or they're not learning at home, and they trust in that.
Decca, what you as being in the communities, working with these folks, what is the role of the church in churches?
So we have, we have an individual on the commission, who is, involved in her synagogue, and involved with her community, and then she makes connections with a lot of other community members and other community leaders, and makes those connections as far as the faith community. And in our community, under our commission, we also have kind of a community awareness committee, and they're beginning to make those connections in the faith community as well. And it's interesting because in a lot of the events and things that we have, those faith leaders show up, consistently. They're the ones who are there talking, when we have kind of stop the violence kind of things. They're the ones who are there up on stage, sharing their voice. And they hold tremendous weight and tremendous sway, within our community, as they should. And so I think having the faith community as part of that conversation is super important.
The police are involved in all of this, right? But again, there's a fair amount of distrust of the police in some communities in town, and I would say, not just in some communities. How do we work to sort of, and is it our work to do, or is it the police's work to do to sort of get past that? Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I would say just education on both ends. Education from the community and getting education. The law enforcement is getting education about the culture that's in the community and how to interact with them, the people in the community, and vice versa. I look at it. I try to look at things holistically, and I think if the community needs work, also law enforcement also should have some type of initiative to learn more about the community and vice versa, just to come at meetings of the mind.
Right. We've got a few minutes left, but social media, which we could do a whole show on that, but how do you combat the speed at which information, good and bad, can travel?
Yeah.
That's something that we talked about in class, digital dementia, digital deluge, digital distractions, and just trying to get the students to understand that, okay, you have your technology, but sometimes you have to take a step back from it. So if it means you need to practice mindfulness, or it means for you to go out into nature and go for a walk, or do some fun activities with dealing with drawing or working on poetry or something, but it's a balance that we have to start to incorporate when it comes to youth and technology, because it's definitely a issue when it's inside the school system.
Right, and I would say not just youth, right? All of us,
Yeah,
all of
definitely.
us were so plugged in all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
We've only got a short amount of time left. How can somebody get involved in this work if they're interested, Decca?
So if they're interested in the Reset team specifically, Lloyd Merchant is the individual, and as I said, he works under the Roanoke Police Department, and he is the individual that you would contact if you wanted to be a volunteer, and you would have to go through a screening process.
Sure.
But I certainly encourage individuals who really have a heart for the community and really want to make connections with community members, especially after difficult periods of time, that they contact him if that's something they're interested in.
Okay, and that's all the time we have, but I'd like to thank Decca Knight and Antonio Stovall for taking the time out of their schedules to join me today and for helping our community take on this problem at the lowest levels and the highest. If you'd like more information on the city's gun violence prevention program, please visit the website on the screen. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.